Hello from Adventure Isle. We are here in Long Beach for the next couple of days and we are staying aboard the Queen Mary. We're staying here for 2 nights and we have lots to share with you about what it's like to stay here on this possibly haunted boat. We're going to take some tours, we're going to show you our room, we're going to check out the restaurants, we're going to show you everything that comes with staying here aboard the Queen Mary. Thanks so much for watching. We're ready, so if you're ready, let's go and check it out. One of the first things that you need to know if you want to go aboard the Queen Mary is that it is actually not free to access the Queen Mary. Even though it is a historical site, you do have to pay in order to board the ship. But there are a couple of different ways to gain access aboard the Queen Mary. The first way that you can gain access to the Queen Mary is to book a room there to stay overnight, and that's what we did. We are staying 2 nights aboard the Queen Mary, and we actually booked our stay through hotels.com. Another way to gain access aboard the ship is to book a tour on the Queen Mary. They have tours several different times a day, and they have different kinds of tours that guests can take. We're actually going to take a couple of tours while we stay here on the Queen Mary, and we're going to share those with you guys a little bit later, but if you have booked a tour, those will give you access to the ship. If you do not want to stay in a hotel room or book a tour, there is a third option to get aboard the ship, and that is to attend an event at the Queen Mary. They do occasionally do things like comedy shows, or they'll have dancing in the Queen's Salon with an orchestra, and if you want to attend one of those events, you would still have to buy a ticket to one of those events, and then you'd be able to board the ship. But in one way or another, you do have to pay to gain access to the Queen Mary. All right, we're here. We entered on the bottom floor of the Queen Mary. They sent us up to the 3rd floor. It's time to go to the lobby and check in. Let's go check it out. On our first day here at the Queen Mary, we actually did have a tour scheduled at about 2 o'clock, so we were there early for check-in, but they had our room ready and were able to let us check in early to go and see our room, so that was really awesome. And this is the 3rd floor lobby where you check in for your hotel reservation. We got our room keys. We're all checked into the hotel. We're on the M floor, which is 1 floor up from the lobby where you check in for your hotel rooms. Let's go see what our room's like. It's portside. It has a window. That's what we know so far. All right, we're here. We made it into the Queen Mary and we've checked into our room. We're here on the M floor. We're room M36, so let's go find it and take a tour. But also look how cool this hallway is. So I know some of you are probably wondering how much it cost to stay on the Queen Mary. We stayed for 2 nights. It was a weekend, so we stayed Friday and Saturday night. And for the cost of the room, plus historic preservation fees and to park our car, we paid $751 for the 2 nights that we were there. Oh, we're like right here at the end of the hall. This is us, M36. Ooh, it's pretty. Come on in, take a tour. For our hotel stay, we booked a standard room with 1 king bed that had a portside view, and we can show you here. Portside view just means that you have a view of the port that you are in, which really just means a view of the Queen Mary parking lot. Look at that. Oh, cool. There's a closet, luggage racks, ironing board, mirrors here and mirrors over there. Very cool. This is like very old school, like wood built into the wall. And they actually told us that they do not control the air conditioning because it is centrally like heated and cooled since it's an old ship. So if you're cold, they'll bring you blankets. And if it's warm, they recommend that you open the window. Luckily, we have a window here on the ship. And then over here is another mirror and a vanity area where I can do my makeup. There's the restroom. And then right here is the vanity area where I can do my makeup. So that's very cool. We're gonna pack all our stuff into the room and then we've got more fun stuff to check out here on the Queen Mary. Let's go take a look at what else there is. Just a little bit, we have a Glory Days tour, which is gonna be awesome. But before we check that out, there's actually one going on over here just to our left, and we're gonna go on ours in a little bit. But before we start that tour, we're gonna go check this out. There's a thing going on called Margaritas on the Mary. It's happening from 1 to 4 p.m. So we're gonna go see what that is. All right. Now we're all caught up. Let's go. This sounds fun. Oh yeah. It's beautiful out here. All right, let's go find some margaritas. on the Mary. There are 2 different like cup sizes you can get. This is the regular standard cup. It's $10 for this, and there are 3 flavors of margaritas. You can get lime, you can get strawberry, or you can get skinny house margaritas. And then this is a souvenir cup you can get. So it's $10 for this cup. It's $15 for this one, which is very cute and looks just like that. So obviously we got one of each. So this is the lime one. That's good. And then this is the strawberry one. Also really good. I think the lime one's a little bit better. So we're gonna drink these and then it's time to go on our tour. Let's go. All right, we're all checked in for our first tour here on the Queen Mary. This is the Glory Days tour. So we just got our wristbands and we're all checked in and we're gonna go to the meeting place and see what this tour is all about. Let's go. All right, our tour starts in just a few minutes, but we're in this waiting area that has some fun signs and details. Welcome aboard. The R.M.S. Queen Mary is the very last example of a superliner from the golden age of ocean travel. That's very cool. And here's some cool old photographs. Out here is the ocean, and it's beautiful. Look at those views from the Queen Mary. That is gorgeous. And here, this is actually the same sign we were just looking at. Here is a model of the Queen Mary. This is the Britannia, which is maiden voyage, was in 1840, which launched the beginning of the Cunard line of ships. Wow. And that last model I just showed you was actually the Titanic. And here's where we wait for our Glory Days historical tour. This is the holding area. Take a look at some more signs and ship models. So the Cunard line had its 175th anniversary in 2015. 2 world wars, a depression, and the jet aircraft was created. This model is actually the SS Normandy. So this is the Normandy. There's lots of historical stuff here in the holding area. Over here, a model of a queen. This is the Lusitania. And here's the Queen Mary II, maiden voyage 2004. Cunard's flagship and most significant ocean liner in the world. 151,400 ton Queen Mary II went into service in 2004, christened by Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, and known affectionately as QM2. This is Queen Mary II, QM2. She's beautiful. And over here, this is the Queen Elizabeth. This is the Queen Victoria. The Queen Elizabeth is on the other side. Queen Victoria. Look at that. Oh, pool area. And then over here, this is the Queen Elizabeth II. So that's cool, this whole area inside the Queen Mary. We can look at models of all these ships. And let's go wait for our tour. All right, we're here aboard the Queen Mary now, and we just took the Glory Days tour. It was absolutely fantastic. We had an amazing guide named Chris. And the thing is, you're not allowed to film your guide while you're going on the tour, but you can take notes on the facts they give you and share those. So I'm going to share with you some of my favorite facts about the Queen Mary. So we're going to start it off. Fact number one is that a lot of people associate the Queen Mary with the Titanic. And there's a reason why people do that. It's because the Queen Mary was built by the Cunard Line. However, the Cunard Line ran out of funding, and it needed to partner with someone so that the British Parliament would give them more funding. They had to partner with the White Star Line, and White Star Line famously owned the Titanic, and that's why people regularly link these ships together. And another thing is that people don't really know the size of this ship or the size of the Titanic, but the Queen Mary is actually much bigger than the Titanic, and 1.5 Titanic ships could fit inside the R.M.S. Queen Mary. So that's fun fact number one. Now we're going to walk around the ship, and I'm going to share with you some other fun spots and details that we learned. Thanks so much for watching. If you get the chance, definitely come to the Queen Mary and take this tour yourself, but for right now, let's talk about some more fun facts. One more fun fact actually before we move out of this location. She is actually the first ship that was ever built that was over 1,000 feet long. She is 1,019.5 feet long, so that's another fun fact about the Queen Mary. And if you're wondering what R.M.S. stands for, she's actually called the R.M.S. Queen Mary. That actually stands for Royal Mail Ship, and that's because she actually did transport mail from Britain over here to New York. That was the route that she used to take. So another fun fact. Let's go find some other cool locations to share with you more things about the Queen Mary. All right, so some more fun things about the Queen Mary that you might not know. She originally launched on September 26, 1934, so it's been almost 90 years. And when she did launch, nobody knew what her name was yet. Everybody thought she was going to be named after other ships from that line that would be like the Britannia. They usually ended in IA. They had no idea it was going to be named after a living royal. It was actually the first ship to ever be named after a living royal. So that's why she's called the Queen Mary, and she was there to christen the ship herself 90 years ago. So originally, before she was named the Queen Mary officially, they just called her Job 534. And Job 534 was not renamed the Queen Mary until her launching ceremony. This is a very old photograph from 1934 that actually shows this is Queen Mary and this is King George. And this is the ceremony where they actually launched the ship on September 26, 1934. Next up, we're going to go take a look inside here, inside the Queen's Salon. Now, the Queen's Salon is one of the most beautiful and most important rooms here on the Queen Mary. It actually, back when the ship was sailing, would have been a first-class lounge, but now is a place where events happen and is just a very important historical room with a lot of really gorgeous Art Deco detail. This room was designed around all things musical, and you can see those musical details all around the room. Just like right here in the glass above the fireplace, you can see that there are a bunch of etchings of musical instruments. And just being in this room feels expensive. Even the fireplaces are made of gold onyx. Visiting the Queen's Salon was one of our favorite things that we did while we were on this tour, because you cannot actually go into the Queen's Salon unless you are as part of a tour group or unless you're there for an event that's specifically happening within the Queen's Salon. So just keep that in mind. If you want to see this room, you do have to have a tour booked or you have to have an event happening in that room. Otherwise, regular guests do not get to see this room. And now let's talk about this incredible masterpiece of art that is in the Queen's Salon, which is very important for a couple of different reasons. But first of all, I just want to point out that this artwork is actually made of cement and plaster, which surprises a lot of people, but it is absolutely incredible to see in person. And now take a look at those boxes that look like cutouts in the middle of paintings. Those were actually where the projectors would have been back when they used to project movies in this room, including in 1938 when they projected The Wizard of Oz. And let's talk about the unicorns. There are 2 unicorns depicted as fighting in this mural, and they are actually important for 2 different reasons. First of all, in mythology, 2 unicorns fighting would produce music, and the theme of this room was music. And let's take a look at the color of these unicorns. The unicorn on the left, the white unicorn, is meant to represent the White Star Line, and the gold unicorn represents the Cunard Line, which are the 2 ship lines that had to merge together so that the British government would give the Cunard Line enough funding to finish the building of the Queen Mary. All right, this picture right here is really important. This picture was taken in 1940 in the New York Harbor, and these were the 3 largest ocean liners at the time. These were all built in the 19th century. This was the SS Normandy, the Queen Mary is here in the middle, and this is the Queen Elizabeth. By 1942, this ship had already sunk in the New York Harbor, and only 2 of them were actually left. This ship, the Queen Elizabeth, actually ended up later sinking in 1974, so currently the Queen Mary is the only one still in existence from this photo. Also, in this photo, it's hard to tell, obviously, because it's in black and white, but by the time this photo was taken in 1940, this ship was already painted fully gray because it was actually serving in World War II. So I mentioned here that she was painted gray to serve in the war, and they actually called her the Gray Ghost, and she was the fastest ship at her time, so she actually never got attacked during her 6 years of service during the war because U-boats couldn't catch her and she could outrun a torpedo, so she was never attacked during her service. She did, however, transport the largest number of passengers at any given time across the sea. She transported over 16,000 passengers in one crossing during the war. To give you a scope of reference of how big that is, the largest cruise ship that exists right now, the Icon of the Seas, only takes 7,500 passengers at a time, and she took over 16,000. That's how large this boat is. Also, the rules were different back then during the war, and she was transporting troops, but still, that's a lot of people to have on one boat at one time. So in 1947, the Queen Mary was done serving in the war, so she stopped being gray and she was retrofitted back to the colors that you see today. And then in 1967, she was bought by the city of Long Beach for $3.45 million. She was brought here to Long Beach to be a maritime attraction. And then if you want to zoom in here on the boat, we're going to take a look at where passengers' accommodations were back in the day when she was still accommodating passengers, not during the time she was in the war. Back then, if you were a first-class passenger, you'd be in the blue section in the middle of the boat. The second-class passengers would be in the orange section towards the back of the boat, and the third-class passengers were in the yellow section in the front of the boat, and the green sections that you see there were actually for the crew. And then you can also see where the boilers and engine room were on the ship. Obviously, first-class accommodations were the best because the ship did not move as much in the middle. And fun fact, the nickname for the ship was actually the Rolling Mary because so many people got seasick while they were on the ship. They actually used to tie ropes along the ship so that people could stay standing. That's how much the ship rocked left to right. And as part of our tour, we did get to tour a first-class stateroom. This is a stateroom that would have been used for 2 passengers in 1936 aboard the Queen Mary, and the price for that for 2 passengers would have been $1,000 total for 2 passengers, so approximately $500 per person to cross the Atlantic, which was a 4 to 5 day trip. Just for reference, $1,000 back in 1936 is worth about $23,000 now in 2024. And that price was just for this normal standard room. That was not the price for a suite. This was just a normal first-class passenger, what their room looked like, and how much they would have paid. And while we head back to look at more of the ship, I just want to show you this painting real quick. These 2 paintings in the lobby area at the Queen Mary actually depict Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. And in the lobby, there was also this beautiful piano that was played regularly during our time on the ship, and this piano is original to the ship and was there as of 1936 when the ship was built. Now let's take a look at something else iconic on the ship. This is Queen Mary's bell, which actually weighs 350 pounds, is tuned to the key of F, and when it was rung, it could be heard for 10 miles. And here there's a sign for it saying it was dedicated to the honor and memory of the Queen Mary and the ship's personnel for safely transporting over 750,000 personnel during the war. And the R.M.S. Queen Mary has been on the National Register of Historic Places since 1993. And now, to finish off the details of our Glory Days tour, I'm going to give you some rapid-fire facts. Starting here with the marble artwork of Queen Mary that looks like a coin that I just showed you, that is actually a replica because the original was actually given to Britain. And let's take a look here at the central area of the ship. This central area is actually called the Piccadilly Circus area because it was a very busy area of the ship where first-class passengers would come to gather. Guests from second and third class areas were only allowed here in the Piccadilly Circus area if they were there to worship, and a lot of guests honestly would just come to this area saying they were going to worship but just wanted to see what first class accommodations were like. Currently, the Piccadilly Circus area of the ship is where you can do a bunch of shopping for Queen Mary souvenirs, but they were not open at the time we were taking a tour. And one last important thing to point out here in the Piccadilly Circus area is these pillars that you see. When the ship was originally built, it was built using 58 varieties of wood. But one of those varieties, called English elm, no longer exists, and one of the only places in the world you will see it is there in the pillars that are in the Piccadilly Circus area of the Queen Mary. And now we're going to head towards the observation bar, which has a ton of amazing examples of Art Deco artwork, which is really what the Queen Mary is known for, is an Art Deco artwork style. But on our way to the observation bar, we're going to stop here for a second at the nursery. Each class on the ship, first, second, and third class, did have a nursery, and here in this area they actually gathered items from each of the 3 classes of nursery so that guests can take a look at what the nurseries would have looked like during the glory days of the ship. Now we're going to take a look at the Observation Bar and Art Deco Lounge here on the Queen Mary. This is one of the most beautiful examples of Art Deco artwork within the ship. The whole ship is really themed around Art Deco, but the Observation Bar is a great example of it, and everything in this bar is original to when the ship was built except for the furniture. And here above the bar where you would order a drink is a beautiful example of Art Deco artwork that was painted by Arthur R. Thompson, who actually has a really interesting history as he was the last person to win an Olympic gold medal for painting. And that's it. Those are all the fun facts that I have from you from our time on the Glory Days tour. As you can see from the last 10 minutes of the video, the Glory Days tour really focused on the history of the Queen Mary and the beautiful architecture in the ship and the artwork that's all throughout the ship and all the reasons why people absolutely love this beautiful boat. But now it's time for us to go and take a haunted tour where we learn a little bit more about why people believe that spirits inhabit the Queen Mary. Alright, it's almost time for us to go and take the Haunted Encounters tour. Now the thing about this tour is, again, we can't film, but I am going to take some videos of what we're allowed to take videos about and tell you some of the haunted history of this ship, the Queen Mary. And I do want to give you one more fun fact while the Queen Mary is here behind us, and that's that the Queen Mary is actually floating. A lot of people think that she is up on pylons and that she's not really sitting in the water, but she is actually sitting in the water and has been now for 57 years. Here in Long Beach. Obviously, she's been in the water for almost 90 years, but she's been here in Long Beach now for 57 years. And she's actually been in Long Beach sitting longer than she was in service. And now let's take a tour and find out why the ship is haunted. The Haunted Encounters tour does have the same rules as all the other tours here aboard the Queen Mary, where you're not allowed to film the tour guide telling you any of the stories or history of the ship, but you are allowed to take notes and recount it yourself, which is what I will be doing here. Our tour guide started off by sharing some brief history about the Queen Mary. For example, she was built by the Cunard Line, and when the Cunard Line eventually ran out of funding to finish building her, the British government agreed to give them the funding they needed, but only if they would merge with the White Star Line, the line that was famous for owning the Titanic. The Queen Mary was built in the John Brown shipyard in Scotland, but she was just known as Job 534 until she was named at her christening, because it is bad luck to name a ship before the ship is christened. Once she was christened the Queen Mary, her first run was from Southampton, England to New York. Most of the time, the Queen Mary served as a Royal Mail ship and a passenger ship while she was at sea. However, she did spend 7 years serving the British government during World War II, where she was painted gray and known as the Grey Ghost. The Grey Ghost at the time did not have anything to do with the fact that she was haunted, but actually had to do with the fact that she was so fast that nobody could catch her. And after our quick history lesson, it was time for us to enter the Royal Wedding Chapel. And now, why is she haunted, and why are we in the Royal Wedding Chapel? So a little bit more history. There are 58 recorded deaths that happened on the Queen Mary during times of peace. They did not include deaths that happened during the time she served in the war, because those deaths are actually still sealed by the British government. But the first captain of Queen Mary stated that someone died approximately every 4 hours during the war. But it's actually the end of the war that ties in here to the Royal Chapel aboard the Queen Mary. Because when the war ended, the Queen Mary did not stop its service, but instead became what was called a bride and baby shuttle. And if you haven't heard of the term bride and baby shuttle, what it meant was that if an American soldier had gone over to Europe and got married, had a child, or fell in love while they were at service at war in Europe, they could bring those brides back to the U.S., and those brides would be given immediate U.S. citizenship. However, the catch was that the soldier had to be waiting to collect the bride when the ship landed in port, and if the soldier was not there, then the bride would be taken back and forth across the sea until hopefully one day the soldier would be waiting there to collect her. Because the soldier's bride could not come onto U.S. soil unless the soldier was there to get her. Now this ties directly into a soul that is said to haunt the Queen Mary. Her name is the Lady in White. And people believe that she haunts the ship because she was a bride who was never collected, so she stays on the ship waiting for her soldier. There are actually other theories that people believe about the Lady in White. A lot of people do believe in the story I just told you where she was a bride that was never collected, but there are some that believe that possibly she was just a bride who got married on the Queen Mary, and it was such a happy memory for her that she likes to come back and visit, and it's up to you what you choose to believe about why the Lady in White hangs out on the Queen Mary. Once we were done with the history of the ship and learning about the Lady in White, it was time to head to the next haunted area of the ship, the isolation ward. Once we were given a bit of history about the isolation ward, it was easy to tell why people believe that this area of the ship is haunted. And not just haunted, but there are common reports from guests who visit the isolation ward area who say that they get sick, headaches, stomach pain, some even faint, and feel like they're getting sick from old viruses. Even our own guide said he will not go into the isolation ward area any farther than he has to because he gets migraines when he visits. And this was a pretty creepy feeling area on the ship, and let's talk about why, because the isolation ward had a very specific purpose. Guests who were sent down to the isolation room were normally sent for one of two reasons. The first reason was because they were sick and they did not want contagion to spread, so they would send guests down into the isolation area so that they would not spread any viruses, but they would have nurses down there to help them as well. If there were no sick guests, then nurses would just be in the normal area of the ship where crew would sleep, but if there were sick passengers, then the nurses would live down here in isolation with those passengers. But it would still be lonely for guests to stay down here in isolation away from their family and friends until they arrived at whatever their final destination was. And some of those guests who were sick aboard the ship also did not make it, and they would die down here in the isolation ward. Now, a sick guest was only the first kind of passenger that would end up in the isolation ward. The second kind of passenger that would end up in isolation ward would be any stowaways that were found aboard the ship. And it was even less fun for stowaways because if you were caught as a stowaway, you did not get to get off at the destination you were trying to stow away to. You had to, in fact, remain in isolation all the way to your first destination and then all the way back to the original destination where you boarded the ship without a ticket. And unfortunately, some people really could not handle the idea of being locked down here in isolation, so 2 of the passengers that were stowaways that were caught and put in isolation did take their own lives here in the isolation ward aboard the Queen Mary. And it's said that you can see 2 shadowy figures that haunt this area at night, and a lot of people believe that it is the 2 stowaways that took their own lives while they were living in isolation. After we were done in the isolation ward, it was time to head towards the most haunted stateroom on the ship, stateroom B340. This room was honestly made popular by YouTubers who filmed in there and created paranormal content, and it's a very well-known location, and supposedly all of the hauntings on the ship can be traced back to this one haunted stateroom. And there's really only very vague information about this stateroom and the person who died in there because there was no morgue on the Queen Mary and no way to tell how somebody died because autopsies were not done, which meant that the death records were very vague. So all we know about the man who died in B340 was that he was found dead in his bed, and the name of the spirit that haunts that room is Walter. There have been tons of reports of different paranormal activity that occurred in that room, but some of the most common things that have been reported are women who have the sheets pulled off of them at night and women having their hair pulled so hard that their head snaps back. But for a while, people actually really wanted to stay in that room. So for $1,000 a night, you could pay the Queen Mary to stay in that specific room, B340, and they would give you a Ouija board and a crystal ball, and it was an incredibly popular experience aboard the ship. But also, just to prove how haunted the room really was, people would call the lobby and ask the front lobby to please turn off the special effects in the room as they couldn't get any sleep, and that gives you an idea of just how active the spirits are in room B340. And now we've made it to the last stop on our Haunted Encounters tour, the first class pool. Unfortunately, it is not safe to enter the first class pool area any longer, but you are allowed to look through the doors, and there is a photo that you're going to see in just a second that does show what the first class pool looked like in the height of its glory. And not only is the pool gorgeous, but a lot of people who study paranormal activity actually believe that it's also the largest vortex on Queen Mary where the spirit world meets our world. And the most powerful spirit that inhabits this area is a 6 to 7-year-old little girl with blonde pigtails and a sailor dress, and her name is Jackie. People believe that the reason that Jackie inhabits this area is that she actually drowned on the ship, though reports actually say that she drowned in the second class pool, but she does haunt the first class pool. However, people who have seen Jackie also report that she does not just inhabit the pool area, but is actually one of the only spirits who has been seen both on and off the Queen Mary. There are multiple different reports that state people have seen Jackie off of the Queen Mary ship, but one of my favorite has to do with this dome that you see here off to the right-hand side of the ship, which used to hold the Spruce Goose. And it's reported that people used to say they would see Jackie walking on the wings of the Spruce Goose, and they would yell at her to get down, and she would jump off the wings of the airplane and vanish into thin air. And this is a total sidebar from the tour that we were on, but I was at Midsummer Scream Halloween Convention where they did have a setup for Dark Harbor, which is Queen Mary's Halloween event, and you can see here how popular Jackie is because she was actually the character that was out in front of their display, and she is regularly featured when the Queen Mary does Halloween events. Jackie is seen as a mischievous little girl who likes to play with other guests. She can often be heard giggling or playing peekaboo, and sometimes guests will say that if you start a nursery rhyme and she's around, she'll finish it for you. We just finished our second tour here on the Queen Mary. We just did the Haunted Encounters tour, and now we're going to go check out the historic engine room, which is also thought to be haunted, but I don't have any specific details on that one. But we are going to go read the signs, show you the room a little bit, and show you the one propeller that is still in existence that is giant. It's actually 18 feet in diameter, and it used to rotate at 3 rotations per second, and it's massive. So I at least want to show you guys that. We're going to go take a look right now. Let's go. All right, so here's some really fun artwork on the wall behind us. There's an oversized passenger ticket, so we're going to take a look at that. But first, I want you to take a look at this, at how it's called the Cunard White Star to Europe. Now, it's called Cunard White Star because originally it was just called the Cunard, but when they had to partner with White Star, the owner of Titanic, they changed their name to Cunard White Star and joined their names together. And here you can see an oversized passenger ticket for Barbara Goodwin in tourist class, because they didn't want to call it class 1, 2, and 3, so they would call it tourist class or first class. And there's her room number and her address, and I think that that is very cool. And now we're going to go take a look at the engine room. Which, by the way, the engine room is open to any guest. You don't have to be on a tour. You do have to have an admission to get onto the Queen Mary. There's a couple different ways to get admission to the Queen Mary, but we can go here.
Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you. So let's go take a look at the propeller box. So you have to go down the staircase to get to where the propeller box is. And this is the only propeller that's left. And it is huge. Oh, it's hard to see down there. So it is definitely hard to tell from this angle, but that propeller is 18 feet in diameter. And you can see the side of the ship there. We are currently on the outside of the ship on a built deck. And there it is. That's the one propeller that you can see on this tour. Let's go take a look at the engine room. But over there you can see the outside of the ship as well, with that famous black, red, and white paint.
Okay, but how you tighten it down once it's in place, this is called a sledge wrench. You use sledgehammers. You're going to get the sledgehammers onto here.
Here's more information. To view the last propeller intact aboard the Queen Mary, you actually walk through the hull into a unique dark-ended chamber containing approximately 200,000 gallons of water, still attached to its large drive shaft. The bronze propeller, one of 4 that was originally part of the ship, weighs 35 tons and is 18 feet from tip to tip. All right. I can see why this part of the ship has like haunted vibes, because could you imagine working down here while this is moving across the ocean? There's so much engineering and parts and pieces. Just the switchboard alone has so many little scary looking parts. As you know, the Queen Mary was part of the war effort, and so this is a whole area that's devoted to talking about the war and Winston Churchill and what the Queen Mary did during her time in service. Let's go take a look. There's a lot of history here in the engine room and in the museum that's down here about Winston Churchill, and that's because Winston Churchill actually crossed using the Queen Mary from Britain during the war, from Britain to New York 4 different times. And another fun thing about the Queen Mary during the war was it never took the same route twice, and that's also part of why it was never attacked during the war, because they could never figure out where the boat was and it moved too fast for them to catch. So, interesting facts. Let's go find some more fun stuff. All right, so this is really cool. This is a whole historical timeline of the Queen Mary, so let's take a look at this really fast. 1874, Winston Churchill was born. He was a big part of wanting ships in Britain. And then all the way down to 1914 when World War I began, and the Cunard Ocean Liner Company was making ocean liners. And then all the way down to where there was problems in World War II. And in 1936, when R.M.S. Queen Mary was sailing on its first voyage from Southampton, England. And then there were still problems all the way until 1939, and the Queen Mary stayed in the New York Harbor still in 1939. And then in 1940 is when she was painted as the Gray Ghost because she was going to become a warship. All of this, then she serves in the war all the way until 1946. This is cute too. It says things like holiday favorite, It's a Wonderful Life. So more history there. And then the Queen Mary, after 1946, even though she was done with the war, she was still becoming what they called a brides and baby ship was the nickname, where she was bringing brides and babies from Great Britain to New York so they could have their U.S. citizenship when they got to New York. They'd have to be picked up by the soldiers that met them. And then she was refurbished back to peacetime splendor after 79 months in the military. And then at 77, Churchill was prime minister. Again, a lot about him in here. And then all the way over to 1967 when Queen Mary was retired and brought over to Long Beach, where she still is today, 57 years later. So that's really cool. I'm very interested in the wartime history of this ship, and I really like that her name was the Gray Ghost. So let's go look at some more stuff. And here's something fun. This is the world's longest Lego brick model ship. Obviously, it's a model of the Queen Mary. It's 25 feet, 11 inches long. It weighs 600 pounds. It's at a scale of 1/40th, and Lego parts used approximately 250,000. It took 600 builder hours to build this. And apparently somewhere on it, there is a cat that is hiding, and the sign says, "Can you find the..." All right, the cat actually is pretty easy to spot. It's just up here on the very top of the ship. That was cute, though. Aside from Winston Churchill, there were actually a lot of famous people that were aboard the Queen Mary. One very notable one was Walt Disney, obviously someone we are a big fan of on this page. He's pictured here on July 26, 1951, so about 4 years before Disneyland opened. And then here's some other stars who were on the ship. There was Lou Costello, Mae West, Elizabeth Taylor, Cary Grant, and over here, even Alfred Hitchcock. And he traveled June 6, 1938. So that's very cool. Now it's time to go see the engine room. I'm the captain now. Just kidding, but this is fun. All right, let's go down to the engine room, see what fun stuff we can find. Wow. Now, if you are interested in how the Queen Mary works and how all these engines work and how everything works together to make the ship run, there is actually another tour that you can take aboard the Queen Mary called the Steam and Steel Tour. We did not take that one, but I am going to share just some facts that I do know that I have learned over time about the Queen Mary and how this works. But there is that really cool tour if this is something that you're interested in. It might be something you want to go and explore aboard the Queen Mary yourself. But just some fun facts that I learned just by looking it up online. The Queen Mary's powertrain actually has 4 boiler rooms, 2 engine rooms, 2 turbo generator rooms, and a feed water softening plant. Now, technical jargon is not my strong point, but you can see just from that one minor description of just the amount of rooms it takes to keep the ship running that the Queen Mary was a massive achievement in mechanical engineering, and there are so many parts and pieces that had to work together to keep the ship moving forward. It might be kind of hard to tell, but here's the control panel. That part's easy to tell, but it might be kind of hard to tell, but this area is absolutely massive. You have to actually go up and down several different staircases just to get to different parts of the engine room. We're kind of mid-level right now. There's a whole nother floor level down there. And we can take the stairs and go down. One thing I do know, though, is that it's a common misconception that the Queen Mary ran on coal and was a steam engine. She actually did not run on coal, but actually ran on bunker C crude oil, which had the consistency of peanut butter and had to be heated up before it could be used. And the way that the crude oil would work was it would be heated up so that it would have the right consistency, and they needed a ton of this oil on hand in order to keep the Queen Mary running. There was actually 2 million gallons of crude oil in her keel, but she got terrible gas mileage, getting only 13 feet to 1 gallon of crude oil. And while we have a second down here exploring the engine rooms, which does take a while because, as I said before, they are quite large, I did want to let you know that if you do come aboard the Queen Mary and you pay for a tour, once the tour is over, you do not immediately have to leave the Queen Mary, and there are a lot of areas aboard the ship that you are welcome to walk around and explore. The same goes if you're a hotel guest. So yes, you can go and take a tour, but you can also do a bunch of these basically self-guided tours throughout the ship. One of the biggest and most popular one is here in the engine room, but there are a lot of areas aboard the ship that guests are welcome to just walk around and explore and kind of teach themselves the history of this ship. We're showing you the engine room here and now, but we will be walking around the whole ship to show you the other areas that you can walk around and tour yourself when you're visiting the Queen Mary. But do keep in mind that these rooms are only open certain hours of the day. For example, when we were on the ship, the engine room was open from about 9 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. So if you do want to see it, you do have to go and take a tour during those opening hours. That's all for the engine room. We're done here in this area for a bit, but how fascinating is this area? I mean, it's a massive engineering marvel. It took so much to get this boat running across the ocean, and I think it's fascinating to look at. So I hope you enjoyed it too. There's still more to check out on the Queen Mary, so let's go see what we can find. And if you are a history fan like I am, I did want to show you this really quick. This is the Queen Mary Milestones exhibit, which I thought was very interesting to get to see a visual representation of all the history that comes with the Queen Mary, and just to see how long she's been around. I mean, they've been building her since 1930, so her story started almost 100 years ago, which I think is fascinating. Now we've been aboard the Queen Mary for several hours, we've done 2 tours, we've explored the engine room on our own, and we've walked around the ship some, and I just wanted to show you, before we head off to bed on our first night, this beautiful view of the Queen Mary, because she is absolutely gorgeous at night. Okay, good morning from aboard the Queen Mary. We just woke up. I wouldn't say we had a peaceful night's sleep because unfortunately the walls are really thin, so keep that in mind when you're staying here. It is an old ship and you can hear everything from the rooms on both sides of you, so that was our night, but we did get some sleep. We love being here on the ship, and now it's time to go grab some coffee. There is a coffee shop aboard that serves Starbucks, so we're going to take you over there and show you that, and that's going to help get our energy up for the day, so let's go do that. All right, Breakfast of Champions, and they have these cute little tables set up on the ship outside of the coffee shop, which they call the Midship Cafe. So we're gonna have breakfast real quick, and then we're gonna head out and explore Long Beach for the day. We actually have a Halloween convention we're going to, and we'll be back a little bit later in the day to show you some more of the restaurants. All right, we are back here aboard the Queen Mary, and it is time to have dinner. We have dining reservations at the Chelsea Chowder House Restaurant and Bar, which is one of the dinner dining options available here at the Queen Mary. This is a sit-down restaurant option, and we did make a dinner reservation to eat here. If you are going to be visiting the Queen Mary and you do want to eat at one of the restaurants on board, I do recommend making a dining reservation. Even though it's not always busy, it's just a good idea to have one in case you do come on a day when it is very busy. We were visiting on a Saturday, and it was when the Queen Mary was very busy because a lot of people who were at the same Halloween convention that we were at were also staying on the Queen Mary. So it was good to have a dining reservation so we could just walk right into our table when we got to the restaurant. And of course we had a beautiful view, because that's one of the best parts about dining aboard the Queen Mary, is that you always have these gorgeous views of the Long Beach Harbor. All right, it's time for dinner here aboard the Queen Mary. We're checking out the Chelsea Chowder House and Bar. It's a very beautiful upscale restaurant here on the Queen Mary. It has gorgeous views, and I'm starting with some wine. This is a Pinot Noir, and then we're going to show you our food when it comes out, but we're excited to check it out. And here is a quick look at our food. We tried the filet mignon with potatoes, which you can see here, and then we also had a wedge salad, and then we also tried the fish and chips. All of the food was really good. It is a bit on the pricey side, but that's to be expected because it was more of an upscale restaurant. After we were done with dinner, we did walk around and explore the ship a little bit more at night. One of the things I love about the Queen Mary at night is that the colors just remind me so much of like an old black and white movie, because there's really very little actual color up here on the deck of the Queen Mary at night. It's mostly black and white and gray, and even the water at night looks kind of creepy and eerie, which really gives the whole haunted vibe of the ship something to work with. So we explored the ship a little bit, but honestly, we didn't have a lot of energy left after a whole day at the Halloween convention. So we explored for just a little bit before calling it a night. But don't worry, we'll be back in the morning on day 3 with lots more to explore. It's day 3 here on the Queen Mary. It's Sunday morning and we're going to go have brunch here at the Promenade.
Thank you. How are you today?
Good morning.
Cup of coffee?
Yes, please. This is actually a buffet breakfast. Here it's $28 per person. That does include a small buffet of food options that we're going to share with you, and you can also get coffee, soft drinks, juice with that. It's all included in the $28 price. And on Sundays they do actually also have like a royal brunch that you can do here. The royal brunch is $98. It's in the Queen Salon that we showed you a little bit earlier in the video when we were on our tour. So we didn't do that brunch because we'd already been in the Queen Salon, and $98 is a pretty steep price tag, and we only have a little bit of time before we have to head over to our Halloween convention. So we're going to have breakfast here, and then we're going to go explore the ship a little bit more before we finish our time here on the Queen Mary. So let's take a look at all the food options you have here at the Promenade Cafe for breakfast. So they do have a lot of hot food options. There is scrambled eggs, there's potatoes, there's sausage and bacon. All of it was really good and fresh. They were constantly bringing out new food while we were there at the buffet. There was also oatmeal with toppings. You could get pancakes, and over in the corner there was also chilaquiles. And then there was a pastry selection. You could make toast, and there was a selection of fresh fruit that was also really good. And here you can see what my husband and I chose for our food options, and we did both also get soda and coffee, so I thought that for $28 for drinks and food, the price wasn't too bad. And after breakfast, it was our last morning aboard the Queen Mary, so we did take a walk all the way around the ship because we wanted to see if there was anything else that we hadn't explored yet, and we actually did find that there were a couple other areas that guests were welcome to walk through that were like mini museums aboard the ship, so we're going to show you a couple of those. But first, we're just going to give you kind of a speed walking tour around the outside perimeter of the ship so you get an idea of what it's like if you have a few minutes to just wander along this boat when you're staying there. This was at about 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, so as you can see, it was pretty much completely empty while we were out taking our walk, and the side of the boat that we're walking on right now is the port side. So over on the right, you can see there's the dome that used to hold the Spruce Goose, and on the right is also the parking lot for the Queen Mary, and also the cruise ship terminal where Carnival Cruise parks their boat. If you've ever taken a cruise out of the Long Beach Cruise Terminal, that's in the same area. And if you're wondering what all these metal pieces are that have like something hanging down from them, that's actually where all the lifeboats would be hanging. Obviously, since the boat is not an active ship, it does not need its lifeboats, but that is where they would have been. And here you can see a better view kind of the parking lot, which is on the port side of the ship. But we're going to take you on a walk all the way around the outside of the boat and find a couple more fun things to explore. And I do also have a couple more facts to share about the Queen Mary. I wanted to share that this September 26th of 2024, she will turn 90 years old. And so she will be turning 90 years old as a ship, and as of December of this year, she will have been in Long Beach for 57 years. And over here on the left-hand side, I do want to point out two other iconic things that you can find here on the Queen Mary. First is the iconic British red telephone booth, and then right next to that, you'll see a scale. And you might be wondering why there's a scale here on the Queen Mary, but if you remember, the Queen Mary was actually originally built as a Royal Mail ship. Her official name is in fact still the R.M.S. Royal Mail Ship Queen Mary, and so the scale was there to do exactly what you think it would be there for, which was to weigh the mail that it was transporting from Britain to New York and back. And now that we've finished our morning walk on the port side of the ship, we're going to start heading the other way on the ship on the starboard side. The starboard side of the Queen Mary is arguably the prettier side because that is the side that faces the water, and we spent a lot of our time eating in restaurants and enjoying the view of the Long Beach Harbor, which is on the starboard side of the Queen Mary. And while we finish our beautiful morning walk, I want to tell you the story of how the Queen Mary came to be in Long Beach. I said earlier that she was won in an auction for $3.45 million, so the city of Long Beach wanted her transported here so she could be a maritime exhibit. Her arrival here in Long Beach, though, was quite the adventure because normally she could travel back and forth from New York to England in between 4 to 5 days because she was a very fast ship. However, in order to get to Long Beach, she would need to pass through the Panama Canal, and she didn't fit. She was about 8 inches too wide to go through the Panama Canal, so she had to take the long way around to make her way to Long Beach, and it took her 39 days to arrive in Long Beach. They actually gave that trip a name, and they called it the Queen Mary's Last Great Cruise. This next fact is one that was never talked about on any tours that I was on, but is one that is particularly interesting to me as a Disney fan, and that is that, in fact, Disney did own the lease on the Queen Mary in the 1980s and 90s. And Disney had plans to use the Queen Mary as the centerpiece of an ocean-themed theme park named either Port Disney or Disney Sea. And the name Disney Sea might sound familiar to you because eventually Disney did build a water-themed theme park in Tokyo called Tokyo Disney Sea, and the centerpiece of Tokyo Disney Sea is an ocean liner that looks very much like the Queen Mary. So Disney's plans to build a theme park on the Queen Mary did not go through. They eventually did give up their lease on the Queen Mary, and they spent the money and energy that they would have spent building a theme park around the Queen Mary instead on building California Adventure in Anaheim. Earlier I did point out that these numbered beams that you see here do hoist the lifeboats, and there is actually one lifeboat that you can see here on the starboard side, and I believe there is also one over on the port side, and that shows just an idea of how the lifeboats would have been there, but obviously these are not actually working lifeboats. And now on to the next phase of our walk, which is to go and check out some of these Queen Mary tour rooms that are open for guests to explore. So one of the highlights of being able to stay here on the Queen Mary is that you can just wander around, you can see beautiful views, you're welcome to explore the ship, and they do have these self-guided tour areas that are marked with those blue signs we just saw a moment ago, and they give you information about different areas on the ship, and it'll give you history even if you're not on a tour with a tour guide. And quickly here we can take a look at the inside of the lifeboat and see that they obviously are not usable boats, they're just there to show you that lifeboats would have been held up by these beams that are all throughout the ship on both sides. So first up, as you're heading towards the front of the ship, you can see those doors that are open on the left-hand side, and that takes you into one of the self-guided tour areas. And this was a particularly interesting area because it shows you not only the accommodations of people who are working on board, but it also shows you their uniforms and things that they would have worn as members of staff aboard the Queen Mary. And there are these blue and white signs all throughout the self-guided tour that give you information on what you're looking at. You're not expected to just know what you're looking at. For example, this here is the captain's bedroom and shows you what the accommodations would be like for the captain of the Queen Mary. And then as you walk around, you can also see different things like the first officer's uniforms and what their accommodations would be like where they sleep. And it'll tell you things and information on the blue sheets like who was allowed in those rooms and how there was radios and things in those rooms so that the captain would know what was going on at all times. And the captain's room was actually impressively large for a room on a ship. I know he was in charge of the whole thing, but it was basically a whole apartment. It actually spans the whole width of this area that we're in now. First we showed you his bedroom, and then this area to the left is actually his day room. So he did have a very large space. He had a very comfortable living space as captain of the Queen Mary. And here you can also see the second in command accommodations for the staff captain. So that area we just showed you was a tour of the officers' quarters, and now we're going to head upstairs and take a look at the radio room and wireless room. And I do think it's particularly fascinating to look here at the radio room, the wireless room, and the chart room, and just think about how much harder it must have been to navigate the ocean back in the day before you had technology. There was no Google Map for the seas back then. Everything had to be done using charts and maps and this very old school technology, and all of that's still here on the Queen Mary. There's just so much cool history to see if you visit the ship. And I think it's really amazing that the Queen Mary just has it all laid out for guests to visit. They leave the doors open during most of the day. There's all these self-guided tours you can take. There's signs everywhere explaining what everything is. And I think they did a really good job making this a ship that people want to come explore. And just think about how hard this must have been to navigate almost 90 years ago when the ship first went to sea. I also like that here in this room they just have a cabinet full of nautical flags. Which, if you're not familiar with old school ship technology or the way that things used to work, nautical flags were actually a way to communicate between ships if technology was down, if there was no wireless or radio communication, then nautical flags were used to send messages between ships and other ships and between ships and to the shore, which I think is just a fascinating way to make things work with what you have. Now we're going to go back to exploring. We did most of our exploring this morning and took our long walk around the ship up on the sun deck, but now we're going to head down to the promenade deck and head towards the front of the ship. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that the Queen Mary served in the war, and while she served in the war, she was painted all gray and was called the Grey Ghost. And she actually never saw any combat action. Her guns were never used in what they call anger. Her guns were never fired in anger. However, she does still have guns that you can see that are displayed on the front of the ship, so I'm going to show you those. This is another part of the Queen Mary self-guided tour. You can see here where they say these are 40mm anti-aircraft heavy machine guns that are still here on display on the Queen Mary. Now, during the war, there was always a crew ready to use these guns if the need arose, but it never did, and these guns were never fired in anger, though they were fired during training exercises. And next, we kept wandering along our self-guided tour and made it over to the wireless room, which actually looks kind of like a modern-day dispatch center. If you've ever seen like a police or fire dispatch center even on TV, this is pretty much what they look like. So I guess this is probably where they got their inspiration from, even though nowadays there's definitely a lot more screens. And we did continue to wander the Queen Mary ship, and we did find this court, which I think is a shuffleboard court, but if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But I did think it was cool to see that they had this kind of like gameplay fun area here set up on the ship. And as we did spend some more time wandering the ship this morning, we did find some more cool stuff to look at. Here, what looks like a giant gold hydrant is actually a compass, which I did not expect it to be, but I did think it was very cool to look at. And as you continue to wander the ship, you will find more fun historical artifacts just like that guests are welcome to wander around and look at. And again, there's lots of signage all over explaining what it is you're looking at. And staying aboard the Queen Mary honestly just felt like staying in a really cool museum that you were welcome to wander. And speaking of museums, we did actually find another museum within the Queen Mary as we are walking around. This is the story of the Cunard Company, who built the Queen Mary. And I know I've talked a lot about how they partnered with the White Star Line in order to be able to finish building the Queen Mary. But even before that, the Cunard Company built a ton of different ocean liners and is world famous for building ships. And the Cunard Line had actually been around since 1840, so they had been around for almost 90 years before the Queen Mary was even starting to be built. And you might recognize some of the other names that the Cunard Company built. They also built the Britannia, the Normandy, the Lusitania, so they built a ton of very famous ships, not just the Queen Mary. And they were also responsible for the Queen Mary II and the Queen Elizabeth II, which are very popular ocean liners even now. So this was just yet again another very interesting area of the ship that guests were welcome to walk around and explore, and it was free, included in the cost that you paid to either get on the ship via tour or included in the cost that you paid in order to stay in a room overnight on the Queen Mary. And when we were done exploring the Cunard Museum, it was time to head back to our room and get packed in order to check out, but I did want to share one more fun fact about the inside hallways on the Queen Mary. Obviously, as you know, a lot of people do think that the Queen Mary ship is haunted, and part of that, like what leads to that, is these hallways where the rooms are, where guests stay, because these hallways are not a straight line. They were actually built on a curve because the ship was built on a curve, and what that makes it look like is the hall never ends. They actually call these the endless hallways, and they're a little bit spooky because it looks like there's no end to where you're walking because it curves up over there so you can't see the end of the hallway. And that's it for us aboard our 3-day adventure here on the Queen Mary. But before we leave, we're of course going to let you hear the sound of the Queen Mary's horn, which sounds every day at 10, 12, 3, and 6. Thanks so much for watching. If you're not already, make sure to like and subscribe here at our page, Adventure Isle, for lots more theme park and travel content.